Welcome to the Movement Leader Podcast, growing together as leaders.
All right, hey team, thanks for joining us for our Leader Podcast. I'm here with Mary, our Logan Youth Director. Mary, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Awesome.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited you're here. And we got Matthew, our lead pastor. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, guys. We are starting our first episode of the Leader Podcast, and we're super excited just about the practical youth leader training that's going to happen through these. And part of that is we want to hear from our leaders. And so we put out a form where leaders could submit questions, and we want to address those questions because that's what our leaders are going through. So we're going to start out with our first question. What should a leader do if they're feeling burnt out?
You want me to start?
Yeah, I can start. I think that this is something that happens in youth ministry specifically. It happens in volunteer positions anyway, but youth ministry specifically, we talk about how involved of a role it is, that it's emotional and it is time consuming. So it does take up a lot of energy when you're here. And even on top of that, we ask that when you're here, you be present. You're not just hanging out or checking out emotionally. So we do understand that that is a serious possibility that you'll get burnt out. My advice consistently to leaders is if you are feeling like you're getting burnt out, you need to first off, you need to check that you're making sure to connect spiritually. Where are you at spiritually? Where are you getting filled up? Are you connecting on Sunday mornings? Are you staying present in worship? Are you filling up throughout the week in your own personal life? But then also just communicate with your leadership. If you need a little break, we want you to take a break. We want you to rest because that's equally as important.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the concept of being burnt out, specifically in ministry, is oftentimes tied to two sides of it. The first side, as Mary said, is you're not being purposed to do the things necessary to be filled up. And that's the most critical part. So you guys are on staff, so you know how much I stress that with our staff is every day we have a policy here, take time for God to start the day, because I say it over and over, you will not be your best version of yourself if you're not consistently getting in the presence of God. So that is the major thing. The second thing I've noticed where people are burnt out is oftentimes they're operating in an area they're just not either gifted in or it's not their best use of their abilities. And so like if you put me in a position where I had to do high detail things, it would burn me out. I'm not wired that way. I don't love being in those environments. I can do it for a small season, but eventually I get really frustrated. So to discover where your skill set is, where you are strong, and then to live in that. So I think on those two sides of things, you have to take a pulse of it. And then also just have a rhythm of rest. I think more often people, I talked about this past Sunday actually in the sermon, but people we have been trained in a culture to say yes. So someone asks you to do one more thing, yes. One more thing, yes. And eventually you have all these things that are like we have limited bandwidth with energy, mental energy, emotional energy, physical energy. And so at some point you got to take a step back and go, what are some things I need to say no to? Honestly, let's be real. A lot of it might be like social media and different things that are consuming us. But it could just be other responsibilities. So I would encourage people, don't pull back from ministry as your first option. Don't view that as an optional thing. Instead, take a step back and say, God, on all the things that I've committed to, what are the things that are non-priorities? And then I think as you strip away a lot of those things, you'll find that you won't be as burnt out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say communication is key in this too. I've seen leaders that start to get burnt out and power through and don't say anything. And then they get to this place where they just quit, or they say they've had enough because they haven't communicated that. They haven't taken those steps to analyze, where are my priorities at? How can I better rearrange those or cut some things out?
And I think a lot of people are nervous to let down leadership. And when you're talking especially volunteer roles. And so they don't want to let you two down. And so they're afraid, if I go and I talk to them, I'm letting them down. The opposite is true. You guys would want to love them well and pour into their lives and care for them. So they need to have that conversation because, again, it might be you guys just mentoring them and helping them understand there's some things you could tweak in your own life and find value, or you might be the right person in this ministry but in the wrong position, and that's just difficult. And because someone doesn't want to let you guys down, every week it's more and more overwhelming to them because the pressure, I'm just not good at this thing they've asked me to do. And so they start dreading it, and that's not what you want. When you're in the position where you're skilled for it, you're called for it, more often than not, you'll find joy in it. So it won't burn you out. It will actually fill you up. And so I think that's a key to know.
Yeah. So we would encourage you, if you're in a season where it's feeling heavy, it's feeling like those Sundays are hard to get motivated for, like communicate with us. Let's talk about it. Let's figure out a plan. Let's at least sit down and have a conversation. So that was a great question to start off with. And in this first episode, we're just going to talk about kind of why we do youth ministry, what it looks like, the importance of it to the church as a whole. And so we just want to start off with like, why do we do it? And the first reason is that Jesus modeled youth ministry. Most scholars believe that his disciples were teenagers, maybe upper teenagers, young adults. And so they were a younger generation. And Jesus invested in them, poured into them. We also see Paul and Timothy in that dynamic. And Timothy ended up investing in Titus. And so it was like this passing down of faith. And I love that famous passage in 1 Timothy 4:12 that says, "Don't let anyone think less of you because you are young, but set an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, and your purity." So Paul is really encouraging Timothy, like, just because you are young doesn't mean you're insignificant. Like, you can make an impact in the world. In the Psalms, Asaph writes just about like learning from the past and seeing culture and what God has done in it and passing it down. And he says this in Psalm 78. He says, "We will not hide these truths from our children. We will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord and his mighty power." And then he goes through, and at the end he says, "So they don't repeat the same mistakes."
Right.
And so we look at the generations before us. We look at the generation that's coming next. And so we need to sit back and say, okay, why do we do this? What is the importance of it? And the church plays a huge role in that, in discipleship. And so, Matthew, what have you seen the church's role be in the next generation as you look at kind of where the church is right now?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at statistics, this is mainly for American statistics. They say that roughly 2/3 of people that are going to get saved will do so before the age of 18. And I've seen that number go all the way up to in 80 and 90%. So it depends on what study you're looking at. And then once a person crosses over the 18 years, it's like 6%. So, I mean, if you just look at those numbers, it's pretty dramatic that if someone's going to be saved, it's going to be in those early years of their life. And so for us as a church and the calling that we have in our lives is to invest in that next generation. So there's a super practical side. If you don't invest in the next generation, then you're basically 1 or 2 generations away from being irrelevant and non-effective. But also it's that age group is so susceptible to temptation, to different things that are going on in life, that you want to teach them the truth so that they might discover life. And so that really is our passion, to help them. I mean, it is such a biblical concept. The main responsibility of discipleship is with the parents, but we are a major tool that they can use, and we're a very effective tool. So I want to be clear, we are only a tool in the sense that if a kid comes to youth ministry every single week for an entire year, we're going to have roughly like 70 hours with them. Well, there's 168 hours a week that a parent's going to have with their kids. And so like, this, like you're going to have more influence in your home. But that said, youth ministry is a powerful tool. And so they should utilize it. I'm sure later on in the discussion, we'll talk about some of the specifics. But yeah, that's why we put such a passion on it.
Yeah. I get excited every year when we graduate seniors from seeing them join our ministry in 6th grade, or specifically the group that's graduating this year in 2025. They joined when we started the junior high ministry. They were 8th graders. Seeing the growth, having the opportunity to see the growth from them then, and their passion, their abilities, the way they lead the younger generation now, it blows my mind, and it gets me so excited for how they're going to contribute to the spaces in the church in their next space, whether that's in college, whether that's here, whether that's wherever they end up. They're going to be major contributors, and not only that, their future of their spiritual life is truly changed because we had leaders constantly pouring into them and investing in them. And so they're going to affect the next generation.
Absolutely.
And so that's like one of the greatest honors of youth ministry, of seeing that growth and being a part of that, an active hand in that. It's so cool.
Yeah, it can be challenging. I mean, you think about like the middle school leaders, especially 6th, 7th, and 8th grade is a wild season of life. Like, so much is changing in their minds, in their hearts. They're discovering
in their bodies.
In their bodies.
Everything's going on.
Like, it is chaotic. And it's easy to get frustrated. It's
Yeah.
easy to get frustrated in those moments. But I think, like you said, like thinking in the long run, like that long-term play of, okay, what is this going to play out as a senior? What is going to play out after that as they go to college or the workforce? As they think about their calling. And we'll talk about calling in a little bit, but we have to have that long view of this is not just they're going to change overnight, but we are investing in them continually over the long run.
Absolutely. So many people know this, but I actually got my start in ministry and youth ministry. So I did youth ministry for 13 years. And I have a completely different perspective now because now I'm a father. And so like the entire time I was in youth ministry, toward the end of it, I had young children, but they were not youth age yet. And now my oldest is in college. My youngest is, she's 13. And so in that dynamic, I view it completely different. And the leaders investing in my kids has been so powerful and so crazy to me to see the influence. Because prior to that, when I was in youth ministry, like everything was somewhat conceptual. Like I would tell students or leaders, invest in students, and we would see it and we'd see the relationship. But I didn't know exactly how it was impacting their lives because they weren't coming home with me. And now like my kids come home and the first thing they talk about is their connection to the leaders. So this won't discourage either of you, but like on a normal week, if either of you teach or whatever, that's not typically the first thing they tell me. They will tell me, and they very much enjoy your guys' teaching, but they'll tell me some story about connecting with a leader, and that's really the powerful thing for me as a parent to see other adults investing in them. Then they will tell me what the lesson was on, they talked about what small groups are like. But you do realize that ministry, specifically in youth ministry, is going to be more about the leaders and their connection than it is the primary leader in speaking on stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And like that relationship is the key. And we'll talk about it in like strategy and all that stuff. Why we do what we do, like it is to push that relationship. It is to push those connections where there's long-term investment. Because like you said, like we're entering their lives at this critical stage where they're making decisions that are going to impact them the rest of their life. And there are incredible challenges right now as teenagers. The stats just say like 95% of teens have smartphones. And most of those that have smartphones have social media, which brings just unique pressure. Stats right now say 4.8 hours is the average time spent on social media by teenagers, 13 to 17, a day.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So they're getting all these influences and voices into their life. And so we need to, be a different voice. Mental health struggles obviously are a thing right now. 40% of students have persistent feelings of loneliness and hopelessness, and 50% of mental health illnesses set in by age 14. Wow. So we're entering in when most of those mental health issues are starting to play a factor in the rest of their life. Obviously, gender and identity, sexuality, huge cultural thing right now. And how we respond is vital. So Mary, like, what are some of the things that you've seen us do as a youth ministry to come at those things, to walk alongside students through those things, to be a different voice? Yeah.
Well, I think that one is we talked about it earlier, the consistency that leaders are here. That is such a big way to earn trust with students, that in a time where they can get information anywhere, having an adult that invests in them and has constantly built up trust, be a voice in their life, they're going to trust your voice. You have proven to them over and over that you'll be there for them. Our leaders will go to their choir concerts and write them cards on their birthdays and love them in ways that are random and show up randomly in their life. And each time you do that, it like adds a level of trust in that relationship. And so in a space where you're hearing a million different voices and you're having a million different influences, to have an adult that has consistently shown up for you and proven to you that they love you and that they'll fight for you, they're going to trust that voice. And I even see it that students will come with hard questions, and this can be intimidating for our leaders, but it's like, yes, we are so glad that they're bringing these questions to you because they have a million different opportunities to ask the wrong person or to Google it or to search it. And even TikTok, like asking questions about mental health, asking questions about identity in the search bar of TikTok. And it's like, you have no control over who can post whatever opinion they have in those spaces. So being active in their life and having trust with that kid, it's vital, and it's so incredibly, it's just incredible. It's life-changing for them.
It holds you to a high standard too, which can be intimidating. But at the same time, we want students to ultimately be rooted in God's truth. Oftentimes, the leaders in that student's life represent that. They know that in a world that's chaotic, they can go to that person, like you said, and we have to constantly be pushing them towards the truth of who God is and His faithfulness, and that He is consistent in their lives. I would say that too, like we open up safe spaces where they can ask those questions, and to not be scared of those questions. I know it can be intimidating. We talk to a lot of leaders that are like, I feel like I don't have enough biblical knowledge to be a leader. One of the things I always tell them is like, it's okay to say, I don't know. It's better to say that than try to make something up. But say, I don't know. Let's go find somebody who can help us along this path together. I think that there is huge value in adults saying, I don't know everything.
Yeah.
I don't have it all figured out. And so we can discover those things together. I would say that the friendships too and the community that's built here are a huge deal. I know, Matthew, you said that oftentimes students, your kids will say like small groups are their favorite part of the night. Worship's incredible. Teaching, I think it's okay. We do all right. But small groups, those connections, and we see it like groups of students praying together with their leaders during worship times. Like there's that connection.
Yeah, I will say it was kind of a sweet thing. I showed Asher. Asher's one of our leaders. He's led a group since they were in 7th grade maybe, and they're juniors now, and every week they will like put their arms around each other, and this group of men will like put their arms around each other and like pray with and for each other every week. And there's this the group that was in 6th grade last year, they have been just wild. So they're in 7th grade now, but they've been wild. And they've been lately, every time we pray, they'll put their arms around each other and like group together, and it's like they're looking at other people, like look at even the investment of Asher leading a totally different group and like making that the priority. That's having effect now on this 7th grade, these 7th graders who like are now investing in the same way, that those friendships like that became such a safe space for them and is changing their hearts and changing the way that they operate within the church and even hopefully outside of the church. But it's very cool.
Yeah, it is awesome. I heard a story of a upperclassman junior who has been texting with a 6th grade kid, another boy, and just like sending him scripture, sending him like encouragement. And I went up to him, I was like, man, that's awesome. Like, what motivated you to do that? He's like, well, that's what my leader does for me. I was like, I want to be that in another student's life, which is so like cool. Super cool. So we think about all these things that we are doing as a youth ministry. We think about the future of the church. Stats aren't great for people sticking with church beyond high school. We've heard the stats. We've seen the stats. 45 to 48% of youth leave the church after their freshman year of college or their first year out of high school. So what we do matters, and how we do it matters. And looking at the future of the church, Matthew, what do you see as you spend time with the Lord and pray about specifically the Tree.Church? What do you see the future of the church looking like?
Yeah, I mean, those stats to me are a little bit deceptive in the sense that more often than not, when people use those stats, they then blame the church. But again, I want to push back and say it is really the responsibility of parents to disciple their children. And so if kids are leaving the church, it's because more often than not, they haven't been discipled in their homes. And the reason why I say that is not to throw shade at parents, is to say that this is what we're pushing toward in the future, is helping parents learn to disciple their children. We want to be a tool that they can use, but we can't be the primary source of discipleship. So like my kids have been greatly impacted by the ministries here at the church, but that pales in comparison to what Mary and I have done in our children's lives. We have spiritual conversations with them. We have standards in our home. There's a lot of things that work together. And so the church becomes this powerful influence because they're seeing it at home and it's being reaffirmed at the church. If people aren't seeing that at home, then the church is a shocking thing, and it's something that like they're trying to learn. So for us as a church, we do target young families. It is a specific demographic that we go after because we want to continue to invest in that next generation. So we are working hard to create discipleship tools that start with children, continue in youth, and then go into older as they get older. So we started a young adult ministry a couple years ago, and we're just trying to bridge that gap to help them in that critical season, because every season is so critical. So you mentioned earlier middle school. I mean, middle school is wild because you're switching schools, you're switching, like your body's going crazy. You have turned from being a little kid to the pressures of being cool. Like that transition is wild. But then the transition from middle school to high school is wild. And then from freshman to sophomore to junior to senior. Then all of a sudden, this like completely vulnerable time in your life where all of your community is just ripped from you. Basically, up until you're a senior, you have forced community in school. And then all of a sudden now you don't. And so like we're trying to provide that in that season where now you're making decisions that are impacting the rest of your life, job, or going into like get education or whatever it might be. We're trying to bridge that gap so that they stay connected. And I think that's where a lot of churches have failed is we're basically, you know, you're 18 now, go be an adult. And we had to realize like that's not healthy. So the future of the church, it's always going to be advancing. The kingdom of God advances. I mean, this is the promise of Jesus, but we have to be strategic to continue to build those relationships and to provide an environment where people continue to feel safe. Because when you're in teenagers, you can ask questions. Like you guys said, you create this safe environment. That's great. But you get more questions, not less questions, as you get older. So a lot of the kids are getting into, if they go and they get more schooling or they just graduate high school, and now they have crisis of faith because there's a lot of things, even things that they've been taught in religious environments, that it's a house of cards, and someone that's skilled to go against it pulls out one card, it all comes collapsing down, and they think there's no foundation for my faith, and they're struggling. And so we want to provide a safe environment where you can ask those questions, where you can even deconstruct elements of your faith, but we want to help you reconstruct biblically healthy, because deconstruction is good. But when you deconstruct and have no strategy for reconstructing something else, that's when you're really lost. So all that said, is that's what we're trying to figure out as a church, is how can we love people in every season of life, to create that safe environment, to wrestle with things, to struggle with things, to deconstruct things, reconstruct in a healthy biblical way. And we just want to be there relationally for them.
Yeah, and I've seen, I think the Tree is unique in the fact that youth ministry is not siloed from the rest of the church. Like we see so many youth on Sunday morning
sitting in
service worshiping, passionately worshiping, engaging the messages. And so,
and they don't just slip in the back. Like a lot of these kids find a way to get themselves up to the front.
For sure.
Which is so awesome.
And they're volunteering in different capacities. So we have from being on stage with the worship team to being in children's ministry and connecting. So that really is something I celebrate. I love it that's a culture you guys have created, because we don't want them to feel isolated. We don't want them to feel like Sunday night is their church. We want them to feel like Sunday and throughout the week is their church. So even tonight we'll have a chapel as we're recording this. It'll be a ton of teens that will be there, which is super exciting.
And it seems like in a sense too, they lead the charge too. I think, as adults, when we see the younger generation engaging something, it like motivates us to like, oh, like this is so cool, like I need to engage this too.
Do you know this is the most common response we get from older adults that begin attending our church? When I say older, I'm talking like 60s, 70s. They'll say they see the young people and that's exciting to them. So like I probably would have probably incorrectly thought years ago that would be an intimidation. And it's just the opposite. People want to be where there's life, where the next generation is engaged. And so it's a beautiful thing, because now we can bridge those gaps between the generations and they can build those connections. And we're seeing that.
So cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that brings us to our kind of last segments of what the youth ministry, the next generation is doing to like impact our culture, to impact our world, and how we play a role in that. And I would just love to hear like from both of you, like stories that you've seen, like students making that impact outside the walls of the church, because ultimately we don't want it to stay here. We want students to be out in their schools, in their homes, in their communities, sharing the good news of Jesus. And so how have you guys seen that play out, stuff that happens at Movement, Go Forward, and how leaders have come alongside those students?
I mean, I think that, and you will probably be able to speak to this specific situation more than I can, just because one of your kids goes to this school, but seeing Fairfield Union as a whole is kind of incredible how it shifted, and how even the teachers and the principal at the school like will point out like the tree kids because they can see how they are different and how they're making an impact in their school and in that community specifically. Seeing the growth within our student leadership team as individuals, but also like starting out with, we'll laugh and be like, we had like 13 student leaders at this point, and now it's 65 because our core is growing, because there's more buy-in and students want to be more bought in for discipleship. Like they want to go deeper in discipleship and they want their friends to experience that deeper discipleship as well. And so there have been so many awesome things that we've had the privilege of seeing over the last couple of years of, wow, like this is a safe space. They're connecting and it works, and they are not just coming for the fun things, but they're coming because they're hungry.
They want to go there.
Yes,
and that's,
they do.
That's an encouragement to leaders too, of like, don't just stay on the surface.
Right.
It can be intimidating and scary. Like it's easy to have that fun and talk about sports or video games all the time, but take it to the next level. Like they want it.
They do.
Yeah, I would say this is the most difficult time, I think, in human history for teens and younger, because I think, we, in our culture, there's typically like a pendulum swing type thing that happens. So I would say like up until like the 50s, basically children were basically told, be seen and not heard, right? Like you're not empowered. But then it shifted to where we are now, this really unhealthy level where we're basically telling kids that you can create your own truth, that you are responsible to be an adult. We're even encouraging adults to treat teens and younger as if they are adults.
Yeah.
And they're not. I mean, scientifically, their brains are still developing until the early 20s, which is just wild to think about. And so what's happened is in this culture, they've had access to more information. It's the most recorded, what's the term I'm looking for? It's been the most pictures and information and
they all have platforms. They all
have
influence.
In human history, right? Yeah. And so but they have social media, and social media is branded, and so they are told that this is the standard that you need to be at in order to be cool, to be accepted. And so as a result, it's a fake standard that no one can ever attain. So they're isolated, they're insecure. And the way that you resolve that is through relational connection and realness. And so that is what the leaders do provide for students, is a safe place to be loved in spite of what all of their perceived failures are, to be loved, to be encouraged. And that creates safety. And so where that does go down, so like teens impacting the world, is you're seeing that. So you mentioned Fairfield Union. The number one thing that I would say to their credit is they relationally love people and are connected to people. There's a kindness with the students that are coming from the Tree.Church into the schools because they've had that kindness shown to them. That's what's been celebrated. If you come to movement and act like a punk, you're not celebrated. No. You are an outlier, and you feel odd, and you should feel odd. Yeah. If you come and you engage and you celebrate people and you're kind, that's what is rewarded. I mean, that's what we love, and so that's been trained in them. And so, it's a beautiful thing. So the result of it is the term I was looking for earlier was documented. This is the most documented generation ever. But all that said is what we're seeing is teens are impacting their world by being the practical hands and feet of Jesus and loving people. If I come to you and want to tell you all the truth that I know, but I'm a jerk, you could not care less. Right. If I love and invest in your life, then you're open to the truth because you know that that's the motivating factor of why I'm being loving. And that's what we're seeing. Like I asked my kids recently about a couple of students in youth ministry. I said, on the surface, they look like the nicest kids in the world. And my kids interrupted me. They're like, they are. Yeah. They are legitimately that way at school. They're kind to everyone. And I'm like, what a cool testament that's so the cool kids are the ones that are just nicer than everybody else. And there's Bible studies taking place in schools, and it's the kids are the ones motivating that. So it's awesome. Yeah.
And I would go back to those stats of the students who are leaving the church after high school. New research has said those are students who didn't actually have authentic faith. They were putting on the show at church. And so I think for us as leaders, we want to press in, like you said, that authentic faith. This impacts every part of my life. And they're going to take that out into the world, into their schools, into their communities.
Let me say one last quick thing. Yeah. And also those stats, what it doesn't show is that when people get married and settle down and have kids, they start coming back to church. Yes. The seeds that we plant, there are seasons where people engage and disengage, but the seeds that we plant, the Holy Spirit waters those. Yeah. And when people start having kids or they start having crisis, God uses crisis to draw people back. But we see it. People that have disconnected for a season, all of a sudden in the next season, they start coming back. So even if a kid disconnects, it's not in vain. Those seeds that you've planted in their hearts are there forever.
Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to not take it personally as a leader. You're like, oh, I failed at this because they walked away or they're not as present as they were. But it's not our job to save students. It's not our job to change students. Right. The Holy Spirit's going to do that work. And so our job is to be consistent and to press in, to love them and be authentic in our faith and model that for them. So with that, we love you guys. We are so thankful for the investment that you're making at Movement. Until next time, take care.